You just got pulled over for a minor traffic violation, like a broken taillight or failing to signal. The officer approaches your window, asks for your license and registration, and heads back to his patrol car. A few minutes later, he returns. You expect to get your ticket or a warning so you can go about your day. But instead, the officer leans down and says something that makes your stomach drop. He tells you to hang tight because he's calling for a K-9 unit to come sniff your vehicle. Suddenly, your heart starts racing. Even if you know you don't have anything illegal in the car, that one sentence changes everything. You feel like a suspect, and you're wondering what you did wrong. What you do and say in the next few moments will determine if you get to drive home or if you spend the next few hours watching the police rip your car apart on the side of the road. I need you to listen closely because most people handle this situation the exact wrong way. After representing clients in thousands of criminal cases involving vehicle searches, I can tell you that the average person gives the police exactly what they want without even realizing it. They walk right into a trap that makes it impossible for a lawyer to help them later. But today, I'm going to give you a different path. I'm going to give you the specific words you need to say, words backed by the highest court in the land. Once you understand how the law actually works, you'll realize that you have way more power in this situation than the officer wants you to think. When a police officer tells you he's calling for a drug dog, you need to understand that this is often a psychological play. It's a pressure tactic. He is trying to make you feel so uncomfortable or intimidated that you either confess to something or give up your rights just to make the tension go away. He wants you to do his job for him. Let's look at how this usually plays out. The officer has finished writing your ticket. Legally speaking, the reason for the stop is over, but he wants to search your car. He doesn't have a warrant, he hasn't seen anything illegal, and he doesn't have a valid reason to go inside. So he mentions the drug dog to see how you react. He's waiting for you to make one of 3 classic mistakes, and every single one of them leads to a search. The first mistake is the most common one, the "I have nothing to hide" response. The officer asks if he can look around or mentions the dog, and you say, "Go ahead, officer, I've got nothing illegal in here." I understand why people do this. You want to seem cooperative and innocent. You think that by being nice, he'll let you go faster. But here's the reality. The moment you say, "Go ahead," you have given legal consent. You just handed the officer a free pass to bypass the Fourth Amendment. Now, he doesn't need a dog, he doesn't need a warrant, and he doesn't need a reason. He can spend an hour tossing your belongings, looking under your seats, and opening every bag. And if a friend left something in your back seat 6 months ago that you forgot about, or if there's a prescription bottle that isn't clearly labeled, you are the one going to jail. Those 3 words, "Go ahead, officer," effectively end your legal defense before it even starts. The second mistake is staying silent and just waiting. You figure that if you don't say anything, the dog will eventually show up, find nothing, and you'll be on your way. You think you're being smart by not causing a scene, but here is the legal problem with that. If you sit there and wait without objecting or asking to leave, the law often views that as a voluntary encounter. If that K-9 unit is 20 minutes away or an hour away, and you just sit there in your driver's seat, a judge might later rule that you are perfectly fine with waiting. By not asserting your rights, you are essentially telling the court that you weren't being forced to stay. You surrendered your right to a speedy stop because you didn't speak up. The third mistake is letting your body language take over. You get nervous, you start fidgeting with your phone, your hands start shaking, or you can't stop looking in your rearview mirror. Maybe you start sweating because the situation is intense. The officer is watching you like a hawk. He's writing down every twitch. Subject appeared extremely nervous. Subject was breathing heavily. Subject avoided eye contact. In his mind, he is building reasonable suspicion. He is taking a completely normal human reaction to being threatened with a police dog and turning it into a legal justification to hold you there. It's a cycle where your natural anxiety becomes the very evidence he needs to keep detaining you. Every one of these responses plays right into the officer's hands. Consent gives him the win. Waiting gives up your rights. And being nervous gives him an excuse. It feels like a no-win situation, right? Well, that's exactly what the police want you to believe. But there is a massive legal shield that protects you, and most officers are hoping you've never heard of a Supreme Court case called Rodriguez versus United States. In 2015, the Supreme Court made a landmark decision that changed the rules for traffic stops. They ruled that the police cannot hold you for even a few extra minutes just to wait for a drug dog to arrive. Once the mission of the traffic stop is finished, meaning the officer has checked your license and written the ticket, he cannot extend the stop unless he has a completely separate, valid reason to suspect you of a crime. He can't hold you for 7 minutes, he can't hold you for 5 minutes, and he certainly can't hold you for 30 minutes while he waits for a K-9 to get there from the next town over. The court called this an unconstitutional seizure. The moment that ticket is in your hand, you have a constitutional right to be on your way. The problem is that many officers will ignore this ruling if they think you don't know it. They are betting on your ignorance. They expect you to sit there, scared and quiet, while they wait for the dog. They are waiting for you to crack under the pressure and give them consent. And you need to understand that the dog arriving isn't the end of your problems. It's usually the beginning. People think drug dogs are these perfect, high-tech sensors, but the data says otherwise. Investigations, including one by the Chicago Tribune, have shown that drug dogs can be wrong more than half the time. In some demographic groups, the false positive rate is even higher. Why are they wrong so often? Because dogs want to please their owners. It's called handler bias. If a police officer thinks there are drugs in the car, he might subconsciously give the dog a signal to alert. The dog reacts to the officer's body language, not the smell of drugs. But under the law, if that dog alerts, even if it's totally wrong, it gives the police probable cause to tear your car apart. They can rip out your seats, empty your trunk onto the pavement, and leave you with a mess and a damaged vehicle. And they can do all of that based on a dog that is about as reliable as a coin flip. This is why you cannot afford to stay silent or be nice. You have to use the specific words that trigger your constitutional protections. You have to force the officer to operate within the bounds of the Rodriguez decision. So when the officer tells you he's calling for a K9 or asks you to wait for one, here's exactly what you say. First, ask this question immediately. Officer, am I being detained or am I free to go? These are the most important words you can use at a traffic stop. You are forcing the officer to make a choice. If he says you are free to go, then leave. Don't ask more questions. Don't try to explain yourself, just go. But if he says you are not free to go, he has now officially detained you beyond the scope of the traffic stop. Once he says you are being detained, your next sentence should be, I do not consent to any searches of my person or my property. Am I free to leave now? By saying this, you have blocked the consent trap. You have made it clear on his body camera and your own recording that you are not there voluntarily. You are asserting your Fourth Amendment rights. If the officer continues to insist that you wait for the dog, you must stay calm and say, I am going to remain silent and I would like to speak to my attorney. From that point on, stop talking. Do not argue about the law. Do not tell him about the Supreme Court case. Do not get angry. Just sit there and let the recording do the work. Why are these words so powerful? Because they create a legal record. If the officer keeps you there without a very good, independent reason, every second of that detention is illegal. If the dog eventually shows up and finds something, your lawyer can go to court and use the Rodriguez case to have that evidence thrown out. Why? Because the officer held you longer than the law allowed. But this only works if you've asked if you're free to go and clearly stated that you don't consent to the wait or the search. You are setting the stage for a victory in the courtroom by how you handle the roadside. When you ask, am I being detained? You are putting the officer in a corner. He knows that if he says yes, he has to be able to justify it later to a judge with actual facts, not just a hunch. If he says no, then he has no legal right to keep you there. It breaks the voluntary illusion that the police rely on. And if the officer tries to pressure you by saying, if you have nothing to hide, why are you being so difficult? Or only guilty people need lawyers, do not fall for it. That is just more psychological pressure. Your response should be simple. Officer, I'm just exercising my constitutional rights, and my choice to do so is not evidence of any wrongdoing. This is a perfect professional comeback. It reminds the officer that you know your rights and that your refusal to be searched cannot be used as a reason to suspect you of a crime. The goal here is to remain the most professional person on the scene. If you are rude or aggressive, the officer might use that as an excuse to claim you are acting threatening, which gives him more power. But if you are calm, clear, and use these specific phrases, you are building a wall of protection around yourself. You are making it very difficult for the officer to violate your rights without facing consequences later in court. The reality of the road is that the police are trained to get you to waive your rights. They are trained to make you feel like you have to comply with every request, even the ones that aren't legal orders. But the Constitution is not a suggestion. It is the law, and the Supreme Court has been very clear that a traffic stop is for a traffic ticket, not for a fishing expedition with a drug dog. Remember, the real fight isn't on the side of the highway. You aren't going to win a legal argument with an officer who has a badge and a gun while you're sitting in your car. The real fight happens later, in front of a judge. Your job at the scene is to provide your lawyer with the best possible evidence. That evidence is your clear, calm refusal to consent and your repeated request to leave once the ticket is done. When you know these strategies, you stop being a victim of pressure tactics. You become an informed citizen who knows how to hold the line. You can look an officer in the eye, ask the right questions, and protect your property and your freedom. But what happens if the officer doesn't mention a dog? What if he walks up, leans in, and says he smells alcohol on your breath? That is a completely different trap, and it is even more common and more dangerous than the K9 call. In my next video, I'm going to walk you through the exact word-for-word response you need to use if a cop claims he smells booze, even if you haven't had a drop to drink. You won't want to miss that one because that single claim is how thousands of innocent people end up in handcuffs every single year. Stay safe, know your rights, and I'll see you in the next one.